This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that only looks stable when everyone inside it stays silent. And what happens when silence stops working? For a long time, power here didn't move through laws or votes. It moved through loyalty, through who protected whom, through who knew what and who agreed not to say it out loud. That kind of system feels strong. Until one day, very calmly, someone answers a question they weren't supposed to answer. Not dramatically, not angrily, just plainly. And suddenly, the system doesn't collapse. It exposes itself. You can feel that shift when it happens. Not as noise, as pressure releasing. If you're watching this, stay with me. Because what looks like one testimony, one hearing, one bad day is actually a structural failure that's been building for years. And once it starts moving, it doesn't stop where you expect it to. That's where this begins. Here's the mistake we make when moments like this happen. We look for the person in charge. We look for the villain. We look for the hero. But this system hasn't been run by personalities for a long time. It's been run by incentives. What actually controls it now is fear, measured very precisely. Fear of exposure, fear of replacement, fear of becoming the next example. In this structure, authority doesn't flow downward through rules. It flows sideways through signals, through who gets protected, through who gets removed, through which truths are allowed to surface and which ones quietly disappear. That's why loyalty matters more than competence. Why silence matters more than legality. Why stability is defined as nothing leaks. From the outside, it looks like order. On the inside, it's a balance held together by people choosing every day not to tell the full story. But systems built on withheld truth don't fail loudly at first. They fail subtly through small permissions, routine decisions, normalized exceptions. And once those exceptions stack, the shift becomes invisible until it isn't. That slow shift is the part most people miss, which is where we're going next. There was a time when this system worked differently, not perfectly, but differently. Before pressure moved upward, investigations created consequences. Facts forced decisions. Now, pressure moves inward, contained, managed, delayed. What changed wasn't a rule. It was a habit. Over time, extraordinary actions became routine. Interventions became coordination. Interference became oversight. Silence became professionalism. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. That's why almost no one noticed. Because the most dangerous shifts don't announce themselves, they normalize. They settle in. They start feeling practical. People learned which questions were welcome, which ones stalled careers, which ones quietly ended them. So the system adapted, not to truth, but to survival. And when survival becomes the organizing principle, integrity turns optional, not rejected, just postponed. That's the illusion, that you can delay truth without consequences, that you can store pressure indefinitely, but pressure doesn't disappear. It accumulates, and eventually it looks for the smallest opening. Not a rebellion, not a leak, just a moment where someone decides not to protect the silence. That's when the shift stops being theoretical and becomes visible. Then the system experienced its first real shock, not a collapse, a stress test. It happened in a setting designed to be boring, procedural, predictable, numbers, timelines, budgets. No one expected consequences there. That's why it mattered. A question was asked that wasn't framed as dangerous. It sounded technical, almost polite, and instead of deflecting it, the answer came back complete. Not emotional, not defensive, just factual. In that moment, something critical broke because the system depends on ambiguity, on plausibility, on everyone agreeing not to draw straight lines. This answer drew one, you could see the reaction instantly. Not panic, Containment. Statements appeared. Distance was created. Authorization was questioned, not the facts themselves. That's important. If you're watching closely, this is the tell. If this kind of breakdown feels sudden, stay with me. Because this wasn't a rogue moment, it was a symptom, and once the system reacts this way, it means something deeper is already failing. What failed wasn't discipline. It was insulation, and that's where the real danger starts. Here's the mechanism most people never see. This system doesn't collapse when rules are broken. It collapses when protection fails. For years, damage was distributed downward, risk absorbed by employees, consequences outsourced to process, responsibility blurred until no single decision looked fatal. At the top, insulation mattered more than legality. If exposure could be delayed, the system survived another day. That's how it works. Not through secrecy, but through diffusion. Orders don't sound like orders. They sound like preferences, guidance, concerns, enough to be understood, never enough to be traceable. The benefit flows upward. Stability, time, control. The cost flows downward. Careers, credibility, eventually freedom. But this structure only functions if everyone believes protection is permanent. That silence will always be rewarded. That loyalty will be returned. The moment someone realizes that protection has an expiration date, the calculus changes. Truth becomes lighter than silence. Exposure safer than containment. That's not betrayal. That's mechanics. And once one person crosses that threshold, the system doesn't punish it fast enough. It reveals how many others were already close. That's when the next shock stops being isolated and starts accelerating. Now the pace changes. Signals start overlapping. Too many to manage. Too fast to contain. Movement replaces messaging. Silence gets louder. Distance becomes visible. Decisions that used to take weeks happen in hours. Procedures tighten. Security shifts. You can feel the system bracing. Not explaining, not reassuring, because reassurance requires confidence, and confidence requires control. What happens instead is compression. Events stack. Reactions shorten. Margins disappear. Nothing here is random, but nothing is fully coordinated either. That's the danger zone. This is where institutions stop thinking long-term and start thinking about tonight. About exposure, about liability. Every action now creates a record. Every delay increases risk. Every statement is weighed for how it will age. And when systems reach this phase, they don't return to normal. They move forward or they rupture. You don't see the break yet, but you can hear the strain. And once acceleration begins, the next shock never arrives alone. It arrives carrying consequences. This is where it reaches you, not as politics, as friction. You feel it in the delays, in the uncertainty, in the sudden rules that appear without explanation. You are told everything is stable, but the signals don't match. Institutions that used to feel distant now feel nervous, cautious, reactive. You start to notice how much of your daily life depends on systems you never see. Systems that only work when they're boring. When they stop being boring, costs move outward. Trust becomes conditional. Information gets thinner. Decisions slow or snap. And you're asked quietly to absorb it, to wait, to adjust. If this feels familiar, it should. Because systems under stress don't announce it to the public. They offload it. If you want to understand what's happening next, don't look for speeches. Look for behaviors. Stay with me. Because what's unfolding isn't just institutional drama. It's a transfer of risk. And the farther that transfer spreads, the harder it becomes to reverse. Once that transfer begins, it doesn't stay contained. Other systems start recalculating. Allies reassess reliability. Markets price uncertainty. Institutions abroad watch for signals, not statements. Because instability is contagious, what looks like an internal adjustment reads externally as a warning. If enforcement can be bent here, it can bend anywhere. If accountability is selective, trust becomes optional. Coordination slows. Hedging increases. Redundancies appear. Not because collapse is assumed, but because it's no longer unthinkable. This is how local failure becomes systemic. Quietly, through precaution, no one waits for resolution. They plan around risk. And the more that happens, the less control remains at the center. Decisions disperse, authority fragments. That's when uncertainty stops being a phase and becomes an environment. You can't legislate your way out of that quickly. You can't message it away. All you can do is watch how fast it spreads. And right now, it's moving faster than reassurance. Which leaves only one question: what direction this acceleration takes next? From here, there are only three paths, not predictions, pressures. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the shock. Rules harden. Distance is formalized. Damage is contained but not erased. This path looks calm from the outside, but it requires sustained discipline and time. Two things already in short supply. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks all at once. Confidence leaks. Authority thins. Every future decision carries a little less weight than the one before it. The system keeps functioning, but with less trust, less reach, less legitimacy. This path feels survivable until it isn't. The third path is rupture. Acceleration outruns control. Events force alignment faster than institutions can respond. Decisions get made under pressure, not principle. This is the path no one plans for publicly, but every system quietly prepares for. Which path emerges doesn't depend on speeches or intentions or even leadership. It depends on whether the mechanisms that failed can be rebuilt faster than the pressure accumulating around them. That question is still open, and the answer determines what comes next. There's a temptation at moments like this to look for closure, for a statement, for a decision that restores order and lets everyone exhale. That's not how systems like this end. They don't conclude, they reconfigure. What you're watching isn't a verdict. It's a threshold. On the other side of it, power behaves differently. Institutions remember what was tested. People remember what protection failed. Nothing resets to before. It only moves forward with new assumptions, new limits, new vulnerabilities. The most dangerous part isn't what has already been exposed. It's what hasn't had to reveal itself yet. Because once a system learns that silence can break, it also learns how to prevent it next time. If you want to understand where this goes, don't stop at this moment. Follow the structure. Watch who gets insulated. Watch who absorbs the cost. We'll keep tracing this. Because the next phase doesn't arrive with an announcement. It arrives as policy,